Good afternoon, everybody. A work session for Annapolis City Council for Thursday, February 27th will be called to order at 3:05 or so. This time, would everybody willing and able please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Mr. City Attorney, would you please present the first item on the agenda?
Yes, sir. The first item on the agenda is ID 5025, post-snow removal, requested by Alderman Schaldemeyer, and I think we have OEM Director Kevin Simmons.
So whoever's first, will come on up and state your name for the record, please.
Good afternoon, Kevin Simmons, Emergency Manager, City of Annapolis. How's everyone? Good. Okay, we're talking snow today. Hopefully after the day we can put this snowstorm to bed. I'm going to start back in November 13th. Back in November 13th, as we do every year without fail, OEM and Public Works holds what we call a winter weather tune-up. And that's an annual training with the department leadership. And we held it on November 13th this year. Again, it's conducted by OEM and DPW. And this training reviews the current snow plans, any lessons learned from last year, and all of the departmental responsibilities during a snowstorm. So while we're here today is the January 6th snowstorm and what happened. So all jurisdictions in Maryland were expected to be impacted by this forecasted storm for that day. Governor Moore declared a state of emergency because we certainly had severe weather imminent. Along with the snow, we had extreme cold for an extended duration, which kind of made this a little bit precarious in dealing with the snow. Annapolis received a total of 9.5 inches of snow, the most snowfall we saw in a 24-hour period since January 22nd. And the most snow before then was Jonas in 2016, and that was like 27 inches. And that was a federally declared emergency. The temperatures dropped to 25 degrees. The lowest wind chill was 17 degrees during that period. The city activated the EOC and began preparing for the forecast on January 3rd. That's when we started mobilizing all the departments. And the response operations started at the start of the snowfall. So here's a high-level overview of what happened. So on the far left column, January 3rd to January 5th, preparedness activities. The EOC was activated. We had coordination calls with the state, with the departments. We went on our special assistance roster with about 200 folks from Annapolis, mostly elderly or disabled in some way. We called them, made sure that they were all ready for the storm. If they needed some type of resources, we made sure we got that pre-storm. The call center was activated. The warming center was activated for extended operations. Public information efforts were going. The PIO was sending out a lot of information disseminated to the public. And then the department started preparing. So in the mid column, January 6th, that's when everything started to happen. This is the response activities, snow operation. Phase 2 was declared. So we had the salting, we had the snow removal, we deployed snow paths so the public can keep up with the plows, where they were and what they've done. And then the EOC increased to partial. So we had in-person representatives at the EOC. We had Public Works, Fire, Police, and transportation. Government status, on January 6th, we closed government. I think I've seen Alderwoman Finlayson on this call, so she doesn't like the fact that we use the word closed government. So we just suspended non-essential activities, Alderwoman Finlayson. And then we continue with the public information. You go to the third column, and the recovery activities, we continue snow operations, we continue public information. On that day, on the 7th, we delayed just to kind of do some cleanup and make sure the streets were okay. So we delayed, we had a 2-hour delay on government that day. On January 8th, the following day, we were at normal status. And then the EOC was still at partial on January 7th. And then we returned to normal at the EOC on January 8th. So I'm going to invite the Director of Public Works to join me. So we can talk a little bit about snow operations, and the next slide is lessons learned. So.
Good afternoon, Burr Vogel, Public Works Director. All right, so snow operations,
Salting.
sure. Our normal techniques here, we salt, we brine, we plow. In this instance, we made a decision to declare a phase 2 emergency rather than a phase 3 emergency, and we can talk a little bit about that in the lessons learned. And there you can see the snow emergency benchmarks, 30 hours for emergency routes, 40 hours, 42 hours for connectors, and 66 for everything else.
So the primary departments were Public Works, were Rec and Parks, and OEM on the snow operation. Okay, so what went well? You want to take that? Or?
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so what went well, emergency routes and connectors, kind of our main roads, we were able to plow and meet our benchmarks. That was fine. We got a lot of feedback. We were able to be responsive, and I felt like the collaboration amongst the city departments was great. I think the key thing here is what didn't go great, and I think that was the residential streets ended up getting packed down with snow. We had a hard time plowing those things, and ended up with a lot of ice that was still there as long as 7 to 10 days later. And so probably the number one thing we would do different is to use more salt early on in the snowfall. We have a couple of different approaches to salt application. In a smaller storm, 5 or 6 inches, we would salt early because essentially you only need to plow a road once. You wouldn't be worried about just salting and then pushing that snow off. In a larger snow, our typical past practice has always been wait, if you're plowing during the storm, wait until the storm is almost over before you start applying salt. That keeps your costs down, it keeps the environmental impacts down. And so that's kind of the normal approach. What we found with this storm is that really hurt us, because by the time we started applying salt, particularly on the residential streets, we had already seen the snow pack down. The salt wasn't able to penetrate. It was too cold, and the salt it was never able to be effective. And so once we got behind, we had a difficult time removing that snow. Then we have a couple of other things that are administrative. That wasn't really us. Or maybe it was. Snow emergency plan. We had an outdated version.
Yeah, and that was corrected pretty quickly once we recognized that. One of the things that we talked about, Burr and I talked about, and we talked about in the after action, is that we want to restructure the phases of the snow emergency plan. When you go to phase 3, it calls for pretty much no cars on the road. And we reached phase 3, but to bar all cars off the road seemed unreasonable in this particular case. So we want to take a look at that for the next snow season, be able to go from 1 to 2 to 3 without making it so that you can't be on the road at all. The only thing that can be on the road, phase 3, is public safety.
So I agree that it'll be very helpful to have that, to be able to make that distinction. But in this case, we really should have, a phase 3 emergency would have been appropriate. The criteria we used, or the decision-making factors we used going into this were the streets passable when we were making the determination between phase 2 or phase 3, and would additional traffic on the roads impair our plows? And by that time, we had gotten the emergency routes and the connectors fairly well plowed, and so we decided we were okay to stay with a phase 2 only. That ended up hurting us for the same reasons I just described about salt. As cars started leaving their neighborhoods and folks going about their day-to-day activities, they packed the snow down, and then, as I mentioned, the salt wasn't able to get in there and slush, or turn that snow into slush where we could continue plowing it. One other thing that's not on the slide, and it's pretty important, we've already made this adjustment, is to brine everywhere. This year we have brine tanks and brine trucks for the first time. This was the first snow that we used that on, and we did only the emergency routes and the connectors. For subsequent snow events this year, we actually brined the residential streets first. So 24, 36 hours in advance, brine the residential streets, get the emergency routes and the connectors right before the storm, and that would have helped us out a lot here as well. So that's something we've already implemented.
What's also new is that now we're coordinating with DGS on the city roads in the state complex. So we have a new partner.
And towing is coming up later, right?
Coming up next.
All right.
You done?
I'm done.
So I'd like to invite up someone from the police department as well, and the PIO. Talk a little bit about this.
I'm gonna stay here because I have a piece of the towing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think he heard you.
So while everybody's coming up and getting settled, I'll start with my thoughts about parking and towing. We advertise that when we're in a situation like this, we do not want the public parking on our snow emergency routes. And those snow emergency routes, as they're currently structured, serve two purposes. One, to manage the parking, and two, it's about those priorities. Where do we want the plow operators to focus on? Where do we expect to clear the snow first? Having those two things linked kind of hurts us a little bit because we really only need cars towed or cars off the roads in the older sections of town where the streets are more narrow. So that, think downtown, kind of the area where we are now, Eastport. But as you get out into the newer suburbs, if you will, we see wider streets there. A good example would be Hilltop or Tyler, the section of Tyler that's along Hilltop, Gemini Road, places like that, where cars on the streets are not impacting the ability of the plows to clear snow. So we don't really need towing there, but those are snow emergency routes. That obviously creates public confusion. That's a difficult thing to communicate to the public. We definitely will take a crack at improving that next year in terms of clearly designating what are the towing snow emergency routes. Maybe it means we just have a less snow emergency routes, more connectors. That would probably be just as effective. But we haven't quite fleshed out our exact course of action there.
So one of the things that went well is before the cars were towed, the APD made an effort to find the owners. Chief, you want to speak a little bit on that policy?
Yes. We, of course, had an officer, lieutenant assigned to the Emergency Operations Center. And when we found a car that was needed to be moved, we made every effort to locate the owner and have them move the car. We towed about we located about 22 owners, and they were able to move their cars. Only 2 cars out of the 24 were towed. We had officers stationed near the business area on West Street, from Dock Street all the way up to Clay Street. And we tried to structure it in a way that it gave us a vantage point where most of the emergencies, what do you call them, zones, during the snow, the cars couldn't park. Emergency routes, I'm sorry, where residents weren't allowed to park. And most of them, the vast majority of them, we were able to avoid having their cars towed. I think it was only 2, Stan. Right. Right.
Yeah, can you repeat that for the record?
I'm sorry.
Could he state that on a mic so we can get that on the record?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think what Stan was saying, we, out of 26 vehicles, we were able to locate 24 owners and only 2 were towed.
Okay, and some of the challenges too that we had was public messaging, and I'll have the PIO speak about that. One of the things that we ran into, the residents didn't know that they could leave the garage early, and the residents were concerned about being towed if they put their car back on the street before the ending time of the garages. So we had to kind of deal with that. So public messaging, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Mitchell Stevenson, Public Information Officer for the city. I think one of the things that we needed to change the messaging on, especially regarding snow emergency route parking and towing, was that towing is corrective. It's not punitive. We're not going to go out and tow every vehicle. In addition, the reason for asking people to remove their cars and to open up the garages was a little misconstrued. I think a lot of the public felt like we were saying, move your car to a garage so it won't get snow on it. And really, we're saying, move your car to a garage so that our plows can get through and as quickly as possible clear the streets. So when we got to the end of that time, which was 30 hours later, I think on Thursday at 11, we reopened the garages, or, we reopened them to paying customers. I think at that point, we were asking people to remove their vehicles, and they didn't have any place to take them to. They had sometimes 6-8 foot piles of snow on the curb in front of their house where the plows had pushed the snow after the storm, and the snow had frozen and was a big chunk of ice. And so that was very frustrating for the public. We were saying, now it's time, we don't need you to be off snow emergency routes anymore. The garages are no longer free. Where are you going to put your car? And it is a challenge for public information, but it's also a challenge, a legitimate challenge for the public.
Okay, I think we covered that. Thank you, Chief. One of the bigger issues was sidewalks, and I'll let the Director of Public Works take the lead on that. One of the things that went well was the residents overall were complying with clearing the sidewalk. And if there was a sidewalk safety concern, Rec and Parks stepped up and supported sidewalk clearing in addition to their normal snow emergency duties. But there was a lot of complaints, and we dealt with a lot of issues dealing with sidewalks. And Director?
So I think this was probably the first event where we did enforcement at scale, so much so that we had a single book of citations in the department. A book has 40 citations. We've probably had it for several years, and only 2 had ever been written for anything that Public Works enforces in the city's right-of-ways. So we quickly ran out of all 38 of those, and then just started issuing letters of warning to every place else. We had our inspectors out looking proactively around the schools, but then also responding to public complaints. So going forward, we've established a little bit more of a solid plan for how we're going to go out and inspect, and then we have plenty of citations. Still, there's still going to be challenges there on the sidewalk front. as you probably know, our current code simply says we can cite, but it doesn't make any allowances for the city to clean anything up. And so there's some legislation circulating on that front. And then so we just have to do a lot of public education.
And again, where safety was concerned, even though it wasn't the city's duty to clear the sidewalk, we did it where safety was of the utmost. So we did things like that. So part of the areas of improvement was educating the public on their responsibilities per the city code, and how would we attack that any differently?
So I gave you each a packet of some of the things that we use to communicate with the public, and in there are some of our communications regarding sidewalk shoveling and the responsibility for residents.
Thank you. So next is snow paths.
I'm sorry, can I jump in just
Sure.
real quick there? One of the complications as it became clear that we were getting a lot of complaints about sidewalks, asking for help and stuff, that history of not doing not doing that at scale, to borrow Burr's phrasing, it also means that the city doesn't have pre-established priority areas. So that was something that in some sense we ended up doing a little bit on the fly of out of these various corridors that we're getting feedback about, which ones do we go to first? And I think that's also then part of that hot wash for us of, that's something we actually should make some decisions about, is if we end up being in a position of needing to provide that kind of support, where are we going first? What are we looking at first? Where are we helping first? This time around, we ended up focusing on kind of safe routes to school, which was a reasonable place for us to start, but that was an ad hoc decision. We probably should be talking about some of that ahead of time.
Thank you. Director, you want to talk a little bit about snow paths?
Sure. Snowpaths is a new program that we can use to share the status of plowing operations with the public. It's also looks like it's going to be a valuable internal tool to see, what areas we've hit at what times. So for a first run, it went pretty well. We encountered some internal operational glitches in terms of when we turned trucks off. We lost that data. So just some lessons learned there, usual growing pains. And we thought it was very helpful.
And we got a lot of good feedback. The thing that we probably have to fix is it's a feedback feature on snow paths that you can give feedback to about the technology. But people have been putting in like complaints or, they didn't get my street, or a plow knocked over my mailbox or something like that. And that's not what that feedback feature is for. So we have to probably do some education on that.
I don't want us to undersell, though, what Burr said about we ended up having some growing pains this time because it was the first time out. And so we had some instances where you turned the truck off, we lost that data. That did provide complications in terms of people thought, well, I went on there, it doesn't look like you've done anything. So, that did end up complicating the communications picture, because people ended up with some wrong ideas about what had been plowed and what hadn't. And, that's fixable, but it was part of the picture we dealt with this time.
Yeah, not only fixable, but fixed, right? We've had snow since then and no repeat problem.
Okay, sheltering our unhoused folks in Annapolis. Again, the credo is no one dies from exposure on the streets of Annapolis. The Stanton Center was activated overnight, 24 hours when we could. So typically we open it up at 7, and typically in the morning at 7, they disperse into the streets because we had extremely cold weather. Was deadly and dangerous to do that. So we kind of kept them for 24 hours. So option one was to extend the Warman Center hours at the Stanton to 24 plus hours when available. So on a couple of occasions, it wasn't available. So option two was that OEM would work with the Lighthouse Shelter down on Hudson Street to host the patrons of the Stanton Center during the daytime. There they could wash their clothes, they can have meals, and they can shower. So how we did that is when we discharged them at 7 o'clock in the morning, like you see in the picture there, we had an ADOT bus come and then take them right to the Lighthouse Shelter where they stayed there. If we couldn't get a bus down there to them, we gave them free bus passes to get back to the Stantons. So we made sure that our unhoused population did not die on the streets from that extremely cold weather that particular. And we have the logos of all our partners green, so this is certainly not a OEM thing, certainly not a Rec and Parks thing. Array of several different. I'm proud of the fact that nobody has died. EOC operations. EOC was operated 24/7 from January 3rd to January 8th. What went well? All the preparedness activities leading up to the event, all the coordination calls with the departments, council briefings, statewide calls with the state, internal city calls, government status when we had to close government. We had to make those decisions based on the forecast, based on the data. Felt that we made the right call on operating status and we made it at the right time. Any resource requests tracked and fulfilled appropriately, and we had the call center open the whole entire time, 24/7, for the call center. Some areas of improvement is that we have a lot of change in personnel. So we get them trained, and then we might not have an activation for a while, and then they move on. So we need to make sure that we get more EOC representatives trained up. So what we're thinking about doing an EOC boot camp where you identify a couple folks in your department, run them through everything. So when they come down to the EOC, they know what to do. It's pretty tough in the EOC when you have people come to the EOC. How do you turn, what's the password? How you turn this on? How you turn that on? How you get in Web EOC? That's the waste of time when you have an event going on. All the demands of that. One of the things that we're looking at and we talked about is streamlining the call center, because the residents they have a whole lot of different avenues for their inquiries or complaints. And that's great, and I'm glad that we have it that way for them. My computer.
You're good. It's just that screen. They can still see it up there.
So one of the things we want to do is a little bit more open communication. So if constituent services get something, or DPW call line gets something, we get stuff in the call center, and all the other the elected officials will get something, and all we can glean all that different information. We can keep track so we don't duplicate efforts. We can work better together. And one of the things that the HR manager brought up, and it's a good one, is kind of to strengthen the communication with the employees. Sometimes employees get lost in the sauce, and we want to make sure that a lot of uncertainties going on, things are moving fast and furious, that we don't leave them behind. So what we have planned to do is through HR, we're going to Uber communicate, make sure that they have all the and public information. Turn it over.
Thank you, Director Simmons. So throughout the course of the event, we issued 9 press releases starting on the Friday before, letting folks know snow's coming, we're getting prepared. Issued one on Saturday when the snow totals went up, the forecast went up. Sunday, that was when we first declared that city offices would be closed. And that's the end of it.
All right.
That's okay.
So it's not showing here, but something else.
There it goes.
Oh, there we go. We did throughout, really starting Sunday night through doing just lots of social media posts about all kinds of things, about snow paths, the garage parking, the move your vehicles off snow emergency routes, shovel your sidewalks, all of those kinds of things, and conducted 7 media interviews. Those were mostly in the morning of that Monday, talking about city offices closed and reporters wanting to know what conditions look like here in Annapolis. Luckily, our City of Annapolis TV studio went out and got video and photos of what road conditions looked like for us, so we were able to share some of that with TV and print publications to amplify our message. I think the areas of improvement is, first of all, setting expectations. I think when we have 9.5 inches of snow, we have to let the public know that their neighborhood streets are not going to be cleared straight away. That was somewhat complicated by the Phase 2, Phase 3 designation. We obviously didn't want to ask people to stay home completely, but when we got to that 3 days out, 4 days out time period, people were frustrated that they weren't seeing the surface of their road, which by that time was just a sheet of ice for the most part. So I think setting expectations for that, and then setting expectations for the snow emergency routes. We ask people to move their cars. They can move them to a side street. They don't have to go to a garage. You know, for folks in downtown where parking is a little bit tighter, the garage is a great option. But if you live on Gemini or you live on one of those side streets further up, if you live in Parole, for example, you're not going to come downtown, park your car, and then make your way on foot all the way back down West Street. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is letting folks know we're not necessarily going to tow everyone. You may be towed, you may not be towed. We're asking you to do that to make life easier for our plows. It's not because we don't want snow to touch your vehicle. It's because we really need to streamline services so that our plows can get in and do the work that they need to do. And then I think pretty much that was it. I don't think that we had a tremendous failure of public information. I think that there were some things we could have done to set expectations a little bit more on the front end.
So I don't think we had a tremendous failure on anything, to tell you the truth. I mean, every year, October, November, we do the winter weather tune-up without fail. And we go into the season. This was a peculiar case because we had not a polar vortex, but close to it, along with 9 inches of snow. We got more snow than almost anybody on that. So we came together, talked, coordinated together, worked well together. I think we were a good, well-oiled machine. However, peak ourselves. We didn't do everything perfectly, and we take a hard look at that. A lot of stuff in our last conversation with the after action, we said, hey, look, around August, we're going to kind of look at these policies and kind of get ready for the next winter season and make the adjustments that we need to make. Not that we're bad. Always want to.
I can jump in there. I think before we get to August, because we have a shortened timeline for legislation this year, it would, I think, help for public communications if we could have that conversation about creating some flexibility within the Phase 3, which is within the city code. Once we get to Phase 3, we're locked into both the stay-home order and the amount of time it requires for us to remove the snow. We can't separate those two things. So because we stayed in a Phase 2, we couldn't just pick that this is the amount of time it's going to take us, a little longer. It's the amount of time it's going to take us to do the snow removal, because we didn't want to be wedded to the stay-home order. I think we have to figure out a way to separate those two things and maybe do a phase within a phase. If we could do Phase A and Phase B, where we have the stay-home order for really big storms, And then we have a layer in between that allows us to set expectations for the public. This is going to take us a little longer to clean up than normal. Because remember, when we have these kinds of storms, like downtown, when our TV studio staff was out there, the folks that were plowing were then having to do snow removal, which they're not just, once you get to a certain point in downtown, there's nowhere to push the snow anymore, and you've got to get it out of there. And that is time consuming. And how do we explain that to the public when we're saying we're only in a phase 2, 66 hours, everything's going to be beautiful? We don't have the personnel and the equipment that can rush in and do all of that work at the same time we're still running plow operations. So I think communicating that to the public was a little bit of a challenge too. Correct?
And with that, we're open for questions.
All right, thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions from the body? I see Alderwoman O'Neill.
Thank you. Several questions. My biggest question that I got from folks was sidewalks, obviously. And I know that a lot of the sidewalks that we're talking about are either, strange as it may be, they're sidewalks that we worry about in the summertime, weeds growing up in them. But a lot of them are those shared sidewalks that we had mentioned, where it might be a county road or it's the back corner of somebody's property. Cedar Park Road is a prime example, corner of Cedar Park and Porter. The person lives with his house facing this way, doesn't have a driveway or a sidewalk in front of his house, and then it's Cedar Park along the back. When I questioned that couple, they said, no, that's city. That's city road. So according to our sidewalk, that's actually his clear because it's behind his property. But it was not going to be cleared. And in the second snowstorm, it was not cleared because in their minds, that's city road. That's not property that they even touched. So as far as addressing that and working with our county parks and our state parks, how can we move forward in ensuring that the safe roads to school, or safe walk to school, how can we ensure that that is form partnerships now for that understandings?
I think I'll tackle the second part of the question first, which is what do we do about properties where you are the adjacent property owner, so by code you are responsible for it, but it doesn't feel like it's your yard. And there are others, that are like this, very notably along Forest Drive, a couple of segments along Forest Drive, where there's a whole neighborhood that doesn't connect to Forest Drive. You got to go out. It's just like Damsel Lane. You got to go out to Gemini and turn right, and then turn right on Forest. But that's your property, so by code, you're responsible for it. That's such a particularly strong example, but the one where you're talking. So with these one-offs, I think within the city, we can tackle these. We can kind of identify them and say, "Yep, we're going to go ahead and give you a pass on that. I have no problems with that." And then we just have to really resource to it. So if we're not going to find that person, then we're going to have city crews going out there, and whether it's Public Works or Rec and Parks. Rec and Parks did a ton of this kind of thing. They tackled the Annapolis, what was the old Annapolis Fish Market. They tackled a big section of Newtown, and so we just have to identify them. We got to put them on a map and treat them as ours, just like we do, let's say, Hilltop in front of Truxton Park or something like that. But that is no small task to figure out what all those tiny little strange properties are.
Right.
And so I haven't even thought about how to tackle it, to be honest.
Thank you. So we will, in the future, take some of those unlikely.
Right. I mean, right. You can bring them to us. People can reach out to constituent services and try to say, "Hey, next year, I'd really like somebody else to clear this sidewalk, not me. What can you do to help us?" Probably the best route, I would think, to go to constituent services.
Maybe we can create a sidewalk. Clean me tab.
Yes.
Clear me tab. Thank you.
Then about partnerships, I feel like the state does a pretty good job of taking care of sidewalks on their roads. County's a little bit tougher. They really, it seems to me, they don't have much of a sidewalk program or are able to put much resources into Forest Drive so far. So we're fine enforcing. That's not a problem. We can write citations, but the cleanup of areas that maybe don't have a clear owner is still something that needs to be worked out.
Great. Thank you.
Questions from the body?
Thank you.
Alderman Gay?
I thought you all did a good job. I really thought it was snow. We hadn't had snow in a while, and I honestly thought people were over-exaggerating. We knew from the get-go that the crews were out. I had seen people the night before out, in particular in Eastport Terrace and Harbor House. I'd even seen their crew out on four-wheelers the night before. So I get the genuine concern, love thy neighbor. You should be worried about, obviously, those with ADA issues and, need access to the sidewalks. But I did not appreciate the way the public came down on the staff in this storm. My only concern, I had two questions. One, I did hear that there were issues with the front of the trucks. What do you call those things? I'm sorry, the plows.
Wow.
Maybe you were just explaining that. I'm sorry. They were having trouble actually getting.
That's exactly right. So we use rubber blades as opposed to metal blades for safety. When a metal blade catches a lip, kind of something that difference in change in the pavement, but mostly it's utility covers, utility structures. It brings that plow driver to an immediate stop. So that's going from 20 or 25 miles an hour to 0 instantaneously. That's really bad for the truck. It's really bad for the human body. So those steel blades are primarily just sitting in the yard. We don't really use them on our streets because of the damage they can do. Now, that having been said, that's why it's so important to get the treatment right. So as you keep the snow from becoming hard packed and into ice, those rubber blades work. But once, if you get behind for whatever reason, you can switch over to steel blades and then just be much more careful. And so the county did that. And so one of the things that I was doing in terms of educating myself, this being my very first time doing snow removal in any capacity like this, was I was watching the county. I would go into neighborhoods in the city. How do city streets look? Go into Hillsmere. Okay, that's the county. They look a lot like us in terms of the amount of shade, how wide the streets are. How does Hillsmere look? For the first couple of days, very similar. And then days 3, 4, 5, and 6, I started seeing some county streets looking better. So as soon as the dust settled on the event, got on the phone with some county folks, Bob Kokenauer and I was like, hey, what'd you guys, what went well for you? What would you have done different? That's where a lot of our lessons learned came from. They said, we switched over to steel blades in select neighborhoods a couple of days into the event. You might want to consider doing that. So that's the issue I think you're talking about with respect to blades.
I think that was
rubber blades that don't work on ice at all.
Yeah, I think that was probably maybe the only serious concern I had, because I thought
it's a valid lesson learned for sure.
And as well, I think the only two streets in my ward in particular, Brooks and I obviously split Hilltop at the Primrose Point. I thought Hilltop was done okay. The two worst for me were not Tyler itself, Janwall and all up near the school, which I know, again, there's some issues. Well, who does it, the city or the school? But regardless, I just thought that area was a mess.
Janwall, that was an area around is it Forest Hills Elementary?
Yeah.
No, Tyler Heights. Tyler Heights Elementary. Yep. We definitely saw some challenges over there.
Yeah, and then
because we have hills there, areas that don't get good sunshine. That's another factor. We that you could see a difference between areas that got sun and areas that didn't. So things that were kind of west facing were very problematic.
Those are my only concerns. I thought the second time around was much better, and obviously the weather cooperated with us. actually, last point. How is Marcus involved in this? I'm sorry, Director Moore involved in this with transit? And what do we do differently for our bus operations? Because I know there was some people that were working out further that were having trouble getting to work and stuff. And so how was that communicated?
Make it is he here? Well, he's on our, go ahead.
We interact with them, and sometimes they go on a weekend schedule based on road conditions and all. Sometimes they have to cease operations. So we just try to work with them. We try to get the messaging out on any alterations on the bus schedules, et cetera.
And we did cancel service, so we moved to GoTime exclusively, which is the one that you use with the app on your phone. So we did communicate that out to the world and ran some GoTime social media posts, trying to put that in the information that we pushed out. Also put it up on the website, linked that to the press release, which had all the information about GoTime. They also were very involved, obviously, with parking stuff, with the garages opening up to the public. And those are very complicated discussions because, particularly when the General Assembly is in session, our garages are pretty full. So that decision to open up the garages creates additional problems for Marcus and his team on the other side because they have people coming to town for the legislative session and our garages are full.
And that's actually one area where we are ahead because I know like downtown, they don't let you park in the garage. So you actually have to find, not here downtown in like Baltimore, you have to find your own. And it's the same, I think, I was watching a council meeting somewhere else and they were explaining
DC, same way.
Yeah,
You got to figure it out for yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was one thing that the resident, we did provide that parking. It could have been a little longer in my opinion, but regardless, we did have that out.
Yeah, and DC, I think DC and Baltimore both, when they do tow, they just tow you to a side street. If your car's been towed off a snow emergency route, you're just walking around with your fob trying to find it.
Any other questions? Oh, okay, I see two hands. Alderwoman Finlayson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two quick questions. First of all, I think staff did an excellent job. My streets front and back were cleared, not down to the asphalt, but very passable. And so I was very pleased being in a community, specific community. My only concern was about the sidewalks, particularly on Newtown Drive, and the kids having to go to Annapolis Middle School. When we had issues with kids having to walk in the past, I pulled in the superintendent, the county executive, and we walked that distance so we could see exactly what the students had to deal with in walking to school. How do we handle, and I know staff came in and shoveled Newtown Drive and I think part of Forest Drive. So I guess my question is, do we have a plan going forward? And what's the Board of Ed's responsibility in this? If nothing more than telling us what paths the kids have to walk in order to get to school. First question.
So, a couple of pieces there. I think the first thing we can do and are already doing is to notify the property owners. So if you keep going off of Forest Drive down Newtown Drive, I believe the first side road we hit is Juliana. It's that community, that homeowner association, or that is responsible all the way back to the CVS property. I think that the name of that shopping center is actually called Village Greens. So just letting them know your property line goes further than you think it does, you're responsible. And then, as I talked about earlier, if they do not clear, if we had the ability to clean and then get additional reimbursement for our time or whatever contracted costs we might incur, then that would be an additional incentive, or at least it would definitely have us cleaning quickly. So Newtown Drive, I think, wasn't cleared until maybe the Saturday after the storm. Going forward, it would happen within two or 3 days. Forest Drive's a little bit, kind of a mixed bag there of letting property owners know that you're responsible. And so I think, in this event, we've communicated that, but again, having that tool to clear it ourselves. But the challenge to Forest Drive is a little bit that the snow plows for the county pile a lot of snow onto the sidewalks. So it's not just a matter of what you kind of think about or think what the code contemplates when it says you're responsible for clearing your sidewalk. I think about you're responsible for clearing the snow that falls on your sidewalk. I'm still not convinced that if where there's a city street or a county street, if the plows push a bunch of snow up onto the sidewalk, am I really, is that right that I should clean that? I honestly think that if the sidewalk is immediately adjacent to the road and the county plows snow up onto the sidewalk, the county should take care of it. And then Board of Ed role, the board does clear, the properties along the schools.
Thank you. And you kind of just gave me, and I hope the staff, another idea. Maybe in advance of the storm, a letter could go out to the property owners, whether it's electronic or paper, to remind them of their areas that should be cleared. As soon as I was able to get out after like 2 days, I drove through the community and I personally called the management at Homes in the Glen and Woodside Gardens because they hadn't cleared their connecting sidewalks. They cleared their immediate property, but they didn't clear the section that connected them to Homes in the Glen and up there by the CVS, and then of course the new development in the Willows. And I think they all responded. I know they all responded, but maybe a reminder in advance that you're responsible for your sidewalks, even if the residences don't abut those sidewalks.
Right. For these larger organizations, for sure. And it is our intent to put something out in the fall, whether it's a postcard or something we put in our utility bills, getting some paper communications out there to the entire community. And as you mentioned, you've done it. The public works staff has certainly done it where we know there is a property owner, but they probably don't know they're responsible. A lot of that personal communication has taken place, phone calls and or letters.
Thank you. My second question has to do with contractors. Do we have adequate staff that are able, and I'm talking about your equipment, to not only move the snow, shovel or plow the snow, but actually when it needs to be moved, dumped somewhere? Do we use outside contractors, or can we use outside contractors to help us in that capacity?
We typically have. We're finding those contracted resources harder and harder to come by. So some of our mainstays actually turned us down. We called them, asked for their help. They said, no, we can't support you this year. So we've got to find some other contractor partners for those things. In this case, State Circle was one of those challenging situations. The utilities crews do help out, but we certainly could have used some contractor help. It wasn't for lack of trying. It is a limited availability. Little fun fact here from the county: they in the past have had about 200 trucks help them with their plowing operations. They're down to 150, and that's just simply supply. It's the availability of people who are willing to do this work, and it's becoming less and less available.
I reached out to a contractor who had done private driveways in the past and learned that because we hadn't had a lot of snow over the last few years, he got rid of his equipment. And I think that explains in part why we're having a hard time, because we've had such warm winters and they figured it's not worth maintaining that equipment and not needing to use it. So thank you. I'm glad you recognize and you're on looking at those additional resources. So again, great job. Thank you.
All right, next up, I have Alderman Schandelmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So team, I really appreciate this presentation. It was incredibly informative. I'm really feeling optimistic from the lessons learned and some of the steps we're already taking to improve. One of the questions following up on our contractors, did our usual mainstays for outside contractors give us reason why that they turned us down this go around? Was it just due to the volume? Was it they got better offers from other jurisdictions?
So I think it's a little bit lack of crews. There's probably a lot of factors there, but yes, they do have other clients that they can do work for, both private and public.
Okay. So one of the things that I really wanted to kind of show the public and kind of my colleagues at large from this meeting in regards to snow removal is something that I think gets lost on a lot of people, is just how expensive snow removal equipment and procedures can be. And if we as a council and a legislative body choose to pay for that, that is a choice that we can do. It's a legitimate choice. But we have to make that decision based on how many times we get a storm like this. So can you maybe give us an idea on what the costs of one of those larger plow trucks would be that the county uses to clear Forest Drive? Do you know off the top of your head? I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot for that.
I don't, but they are quite expensive. They're a good sized dump truck is a couple $100,000 at least. Yeah.
And how much does it usually cost us to like purchase and maintain our regular road salt that we use?
I think we budget about 100,000.
Yeah. So if we were to up that to something that would be more effective in sub-zero temperatures, like calcium chloride, which is something that gets used in like really, really cold states. That's like northern Maine.
Yeah. I think you mean magnesium chloride.
Magnesium chloride is another one that is used. Calcium. Yep. Magnesium chloride. Yep. Sorry.
It's okay.
But science. But yeah, what the more effective thing than good old fashioned rock salt.
Right.
That gets used in those super cold, like Great Plains states that get those negative 20-degree winters. Like, is that a more expensive thing to operate?
A much more expensive thing with evidently different equipment for dispensing even. And so this is something that has been considered, but we really haven't felt the need because this is very rare that we get snow preceded by really cold temperatures and then followed by cold temperatures. Should we encounter these kinds of events regularly in the future, I will certainly be asking for those resources.
So the more the greater snow melt than rock salt, I'm confident we won't need, but I do think it would be worth our time to consider a larger plow truck. And if you could get us the information on costs and maintenance for that, for an upcoming budget, I would appreciate that. If we choose to pull the trigger on it, okay. If we choose that these snowstorms are pretty few and far between, like you guys did give us an example of when we actually get these large enough snowstorms, that is a judgment call on our part. Do we want to spend the money on that larger truck? That is up for us as a legislative body to decide. But I think us having that information and being able to share that information for why we do not have that is very much worthwhile for us to have.
Much appreciated.
Yes. With regards to snow paths, I do really want to sing the praises of it. It was probably one of the best received tools that I put out to my constituents, and they loved it. One note that I have as feedback is if we are continuing plowing operations post like a snowstorm ending, which is when we ended it during that last one, we should potentially keep showing the plowing operations going after that. That was one recommendation a constituent put forward to me because we weren't continuing plowing operations after the snowfall had ended, but SnowPaths wasn't showing those updates, and they were wondering, is my neighborhood getting plowed? It's not showing up on SnowPaths. And I was assuring them, yes, our crews are out there. They're working hard. They're getting to you guys. Um, and I guess there's one last thing that was brought forward to me, and that is our reporting system for snow maintenance issues, whether it's request for plows or sidewalk operations. Just due to the sheer volume of what we had, there was a lot of people needing to report things for large blocks. For a couple several houses on Hilltop was one of the more notorious ones. And some people got frustrated having to report each individual house, or there were areas where the specific address wasn't particularly neatly lined up because the property line was here, but you couldn't really report that patch in. So people would just kind of try their best to report that, or they would just go, here's a house where it is, but the whole area was between here and here.
I recognize that. And thanks for the opportunity for allowing me to plug the Public Works website. At the Public Works website, you will find 3 convenient ways to contact the Public Works Department. One is the portal, which you just mentioned, but there are 2 others that work equally well. That's to call us. I think the extension, the last 4 is 7949, but use what's on the website. Or email us at pubworks@annapolis.gov. Certainly, please encourage your constituents to email Public Works directly, not you. It takes a burden off of you. When you get an email, you feel compelled to email it to me. That is 2 unnecessary opportunities for somebody to drop a ball. And so we set up these communication tools there. We really want the public, not just for snow removal, but potholes, down signs, whatever. We really need the public to use the 3 communication tools that we have available to us. And as you mentioned, if the portal is not the right one, the Submit a Problem service, you use one of the others. Thank you.
Thank you. Overall, though, I do want to say our public works crews worked incredibly hard through this massive storm. I believe I overheard someone say this is the first time we've had this much snow and this cold temperatures for this long in something like 80, 90 years. I don't know the accuracy of that, but it has certainly been the most snow and the most cold temperature after that since I moved here in 2012. So the work that our public works department did, long shifts for week, 2 weeks at a time, was noticed. It's greatly appreciated. So your department was out there working very hard, and we all did notice that. And I do want to say thank you guys to the Operational Emergency Management, to the Public Works team. You all worked very hard on this, and it's greatly appreciated. So thank you.
I really appreciate it, but that also, don't forget Rec and Parks. They're out there clearing paths and sidewalks and stepping up every place the city needed them to. So the maintenance staff at Rec and Parks was huge as well.
Yes. Oh, I have one last question if the chair will indulge me.
There he is.
There he is.
If the chair will indulge me. So you mentioned earlier when in the neighborhoods, in the residential streets, when the snow got packed down, our plowing and our salt got a little bit less effective in that operation. Do we have a way to compensate for that now, or a procedure to compensate for that now besides the steel blades on the plows, or is that
The most important thing is the use of salt. If we can keep, well, the 2 things, right? The use of salt, and that'll be the more common one. If we can keep the snow from turning into ice, the rubber plows will work well. The other one is if it's an event like this, and I think it's going to be very rare, but should it happen again, I definitely would have encouraged the mayor to declare a phase 3 emergency. That would have kept cars off the roads. That would have kept the snow from being packed down quite as quickly.
And that is all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderwoman Pindell Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. First of all, again, as echoed by everyone, thank you all so much. This is always a collaborative effort, and I can't think of probably one department that hasn't been included in what we do. And I want to recognize Chief O'Malley back there from the fire department as well, because when you have a medical emergency, you got to call the medics. And so I think every department, like pretty much everything we do, every department is included. It's a collaborative effort. We're always trying to perfect what we do. It's ever evolving. No snowfall is the same. I think we all can agree on that. Several things I'm going to mention about Ward 3. Thank you, Ms. Buckland, for the photographs in the report. And I think mine include Hicks Avenue, Admiral Drive, Dorsey Avenue, and West Street, which is a state roadway. And that seems to always, the state roadways seem to be the ones that are more passable than any others for the usual reasons. Couple of questions. Number one, the problems that I had, one specific problem, were I have quite a few dead-end streets. I've got Gross Avenue, I've got Bowie Avenue, I've got Parker Avenue, and I've got Holclaw Street just off the top of and Rosewood. And so, there's always a problem. It seems like I get more calls for those dead-end streets, and how do you get the snow removed from the bottom of the hill to come up the hill, and the ice forms and that sort of thing. So what's kind of the process for the dead-end streets, unlike other streets?
So let's ignore the issue of a giant snow pile ending up somewhere where it shouldn't be. I haven't heard any reports of that happening, but maybe they were out there and they just didn't make it to me. The more widespread issue that I saw was the plow drivers didn't make it to some of those streets and early on, and I think there's a combination of factors there. It's a little bit of a lack of experience. We haven't had snow, a lot of snow in the last several years. So we just have these areas. You're supposed to go out there and do this zone, and people hadn't necessarily had the training or the repetitions, the recent repetitions that they needed. Another challenge is it was hard to tell the street that you had plowed from a street that you hadn't, because it all looked white, and it was. I think they had a visual challenge there, and then. We can use snowpads a little bit better. We've got office staff. So we've got people who have the ability to look at computers, look at what's been plowed in the last 12 hours, and make sure that, we can try to find some of these oversights. So if I know it's been slightly different events from the January 6th to the two that have happened since, but I saw a lot of improvement in those subsequent events. So, the crews quickly learned, or their supervisors, the team, everybody kind of got together and figured out ways of making sure we don't miss things. Gross Avenue, again, up on the hill, I think it just didn't get enough sun. That ended up being people tried over and over and over to clear it, and that's probably a situation we should have attacked it with a steel blade, and that's what we would do in the future.
Okay, and Gilmer is another one. But anyway, the other question that I have is Annapolis Gardens, which is private, Kroll Drive, Bowman Court, Bowman Drive. I didn't hear any complaints, but I don't know, how do you handle that community? How have you handled that community?
It's private. We don't.
I didn't know if there were any exceptions to the rule or what.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, all right. The other thing that we perpetually kind of have, and this is off the grid, is Gibraltar, and I'm working with Office of Law, so we're going to try to get that straightened out as soon as we can. That's been ongoing for.
Did we not plow Gibraltar?
Well, it's usually what happens is you plow it, but of course you get more potholes with the salt or whatever you're using,
right? And
that seems to be an issue. So that's
just we again, if folks will report those potholes, we'll repair the potholes.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I know it needs a complete rebuild at this point, and that's the larger challenge.
Okay, thank you. The last thing is, I remember, as I recall, when I came on the council and through Director Simmons, we had a list of dialysis patients and other persons who might have issues as far as going out to their appointments. Do we still keep that list? Is it growing, or are people aware of it? Is there something on the website that people can sign up for?
Yes, there's something on our website that they can sign up for. That's a special assistance roster. And I do believe it's maybe about 200 folks. And when we see something imminent like this storm and it's forecast to come, we actually sit a couple people in a room and they just call them. You know, how you doing? You know, we have the storm coming. Do you have everything that you need? They may need some non-perishable goods or something like that. We make sure we go and do a delivery. Just kind of make sure that they're in a safe place pre-storm, and then we try to check on them post-storm as well.
Okay, great. Again, thank you all so very, very much. I'm so proud that we have such great teams in the city that cooperate and collaborate when we have events like this. But thank you all again.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I do want to say thanks as well, because I really commend you on it. Clearly, I think you all have really prioritized public safety and welfare of the public. You're willing to just get out there and do what needs to get done. Taking people to shelters, to the warming facilities, clearing the sidewalks, finding the complaints. You clearly didn't, you didn't give any kind of bureaucratic excuse. There wasn't any hot potato between the departments, and you want to commend you on that, because it did. That's what we really received from the county is they were telling us the law office was going to do enforcement, and then the police. And when you contact the police, they said contact Public Works, and they weren't telling us constituents or us how to direct constituents who to contact, how to actually get these complaints out there. And it was just going back and forth while public was put at risk. So I really want to commend you and compliment on that. And I do thank you on setting the expectations. I think that's really key part on this. I've been doing a lot of traveling because I like to ski, and comparing snow removal in other jurisdictions. And granted, a lot of these are much more used to the snow removal, but the roads are snow covered probably the whole season, and people aren't complaining. And they do have the equipment. But I think even with the equipment too, to the Alderman's point, and one of the things I mentioned, I think in Burlington, again, I know granted a snow town, but they had this really neat, it was a snow blower that they just drove right down. It was as wide as the sidewalks. So they just had to make, 1-2 passes and things done. Probably very efficiently. But of course, to get to that point, we have to make sure our sidewalks are actually wide enough without obstructions, right? And so that's one thing I was kind of thinking of, is we may want to look to do that at some point. Maybe we have something like that, because it obviously benefits the other initiatives we're working on, as far as on people to take their bikes, scooters on the sidewalks, and just make them ADA compliant. So it seems like it's a win-win on a lot of these different issues if we can bring our sidewalks up to speed, up to code. So maybe we think about that in the budget as far as how to. I think many years ago we've done an inventory of some kind with our sidewalks. Do you recall anything, Director? I think it predates you by a number of years.
Just did one for the Urban 3 study.
Sorry, repeat that?
Just did one for that Urban 3 study.
Oh, well, I know they have technology now where companies can drive around, and I think we heard about that in transportation. They can use image cameras to identify deficiencies with signing or potentially sidewalks. But in any case, one thing I also wanted to mention was regarding the cyber attack that the county's been still reeling from. And Director Simmons, you mentioned efficient login and all the other technology that we're using. So I just want to emphasize with folks that to start thinking about, somebody could potentially use a situation like this as a moment to launch a cyber attack. We need to make sure we have capabilities to your point, make sure we can get into these systems, because the county's been locked out as far as our login. We've been shut down essentially, except virtually, because we do everything through Google, but shut down in many ways for 4 days this week. And so if there was something going on, that could be, we can't access our mapping, can't print things out, so I think that maybe you already have thought of that with your planning documents, but it just came to my mind.
Yeah, point taken on that one. And I'll be happy to talk to you offline on that.
Okay. Understood. And was there, so as far as sidewalk clearing, we talked about that a lot. And I think I mentioned also it'd be good to work with planning and zoning to identify some priority sidewalks that might need to get cleared first. Kind of like we do with the streets, with arterial roadways, emergency roadways. There might be similar concept to apply with sidewalks to make it a bit more efficient as far as how we direct those resources. And equipment. So, and what is the state? How you said the state's done a fairly good job. Do you know what their procedures are for removing on sidewalks?
So, I mean, really thinking of bridges, but they quite possibly go beyond that a little bit. If you look at Route Boulevard across College Creek, was an area that, you know, was taken care of pretty well. Most of the time, the Spot Creek Bridge gets done. It looked like there was a day or two before they could get contractors out there recently, but, you know, they get to them.
I'm going to say on that day, on the 6th, that Monday, in front of District Court and the DNR, there were probably 24 people out there in orange vests with shovels. So it was a pretty labor-intensive effort for them to remove. I mean, they didn't have snow blowers or anything. They were literally shoveling the snow off of those sidewalks there.
Good. And so going back to some of the procedures, you've told us there are plenty of options for ways people can report complaints. You said people can go on the website and fill out the whatever it's called, C-Click Fix, and put it to request a work order. There's a phone number to call, and I think you mentioned a third one.
Email. Email's probably the easiest one, because I know a lot of folks email you guys for routine maintenance activities, and it would be just as easy to email PubWorks, PUBWORKS, at Annapolis.gov instead of you.
Yeah, and that'd be good. So ahead of a storm, maybe to resend out to council. Again, setting expectations for us too, but we are also often some of the first responders as far as people come to us with their complaints. So just reminding us, here are your contact methods, and we can send that out ahead of time to our constituents as well.
And certainly, I don't mean to interrupt, but if people have made repeated attempts to have an issue resolved and they're not getting traction, that's when they should escalate to you or to Hillary or somebody like that.
Yeah, understood. And what's the internal? So it sounds like Public Works is handling enforcement right now for sidewalk.
Yes, Public Works handles enforcement.
And how long do you typically give people to clear it, a sidewalk, before you step in and actually remove it?
Right. So you'll get cited. We'll start issuing citations if the snow falls overnight. At around noon is when our folks will go out and start writing those tickets. And then if it's those priority routes that we know we have to get cleared, so that's going to be our safe routes to school, we'll start tackling those. And we really didn't have a plan going into this year or any previous year. Kind of divvy up between what is the availability that we have in Public Works is very limited, because most of our staff are out there driving the plows. We do have a few folks that are responsible for, like the downtown crew that do the trash and things that are available. So we have a small amount of staff. Rec and Parks has a larger amount of staff, but they're busy. They've got a lot of their own primary responsibilities. Think the Poplar Trail and things like that. So we'll just issue citations and then tackle the high priority areas. And beyond that, that's really about as far as we would go right now.
Okay.
The one thing I'll add is that the code actually, in the same section where it talks about who has responsibility, there actually are some timelines in the code. So those timelines, that's not random on DPW.
Right. No, that's, we just follow the code. We give people a little bit more leeway. The code says maybe 3 hours from the end of the snowstorm, and then it makes some provisions for overnight. And we more or less follow that, but of course we give a little bit of a grace period.
If you haven't done it already, I think there'd be benefit to writing this down in some kind of policy, internal policy. I'd also like to just be able to have that handy to show to people, and including the county, to show we're, as far as us being ahead of them. I think that'd be a good thing. So is there a plan to write down anything like that?
Nothing formal in the works.
Okay. Is that
Just
something
like internal meeting notes is all we have.
Okay.
When we do push information out about the sidewalks, though, we do include that section of code that spells out exactly how long they have after snow falls or after it falls overnight. So when we push that information out, we're definitely including that for the public to know what their deadlines are.
Well, just ask the city manager to consider writing something down that we could at least, I think it's important to have continuity moving forward. Staff changes, they can just go ahead and say, here's our policy for snow removal and sidewalks, because what we have written in code is very minimal.
Yeah, there is additional information that's on the website, sort of just permanently,
Okay.
about snow clearing. But I think to get at the question that you had, or a request you had posed earlier, of that general reminder for you guys, that just as a reminder, here are the paths, here's the information here's the link to the particular page on the website, and some things like that, just so that you have it really very readily available. Do you want to add anything, Hillary? No. Okay.
We have two other things. One is the clearing along county roadways. I know we put an expense towards that. And I guess this actually leads into my last comment, which is we talked on Monday night about possibly sending out a letter from the city council and the mayor to the county, just asking, I think in many ways just expressing our frustration, our request to get some kind of policy, some answers from them as far as how they handle it, because our constituents are shared constituents. We both get complaints, and so our residents are both put at risk when snow removal goes south, be it on the road or sidewalk. And so I think we're going to send some kind of letter to the county, but also the school district. And so, the one idea I could come up with is maybe some kind of MOU along those lines that could be worked out between the jurisdictions, because again, one of the issues was that the county had the expectation that on county roadways, county infrastructure that was surrounded by city property, that the city would be doing enforcement. That didn't make sense to me, because it's county infrastructure. Why would the city do enforcement on county infrastructure, on county code? So
it doesn't bother me. It's not a ton, relative to the full scope of the city, right? To enforce on Forest Drive. Be happy to not do it, but until the county gets everything figured out in terms of what's an appropriate size of a citation and things like that, it doesn't seem, I don't know, out of line or whatever. We can issue the citation. It's the actual cleanup part, or dealing with these property owners who are going to probably fight those citations. What are we going to do then if they just say no, we're not going to do that? Is it because it's unfair? And I think they would have a point.
There is a monetary cost to having to write the citations, do the follow-up, go to municipal court. I've had to do that in code enforcement. So there's a cost, and I think there's no county infrastructure other than sidewalks that we would ever do enforcement on that I could think of. It's just not our property. It's not why would we do it? But it does have a monetary, like you said, even the clearing that you said does have a monetary cost. And so $20,000 or more, I think, some of these clearings, so it'd be good to work out. So I guess we'll be in touch about that. But that's all that said. Again, good job. I don't know if we'll get any more snow, but sometimes it does happen in March here.
Nope, not going to happen.
All right, is there anything else from the body?
No, I'm not worried.
All right, seeing no more questions, I guess. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.